this might be a bit of a hot take in the online politics sphere these days. You know, we all like our contention, but I think that Epstein was cringe, and still is. You know, in spite of his death, I think he remains cringe, sort of in a post mortem sense. And the trial for his confidant and number two, Ghislaine Maxwell, is currently taking place, which is really interesting, you know, considering the way things ended last time, with Epstein mysteriously, inexplicably dying in just a manner as to prevent a trial which could have implicated a great number of powerful people from happening. So we're here now with Maxwell's trial, who has not killed herself just yet. And let's take a look at what's happened. I'm learning as you learn. What happened on the first... Wait, please stop with the Epstein conspiracies. Honest to God, I think the idea that he killed himself is more conspiratorial than anything else. The guard's absence, like cameras being taken off watch for like the highest profile prisoner held on Earth at the time. Like, is it really that much of a stretch to think that with all the people Epstein could implicate, that they wouldn't like kill him? Like, is that really conspiratorial? I mean, it's like, that seems logical. Like, imagine you're reading a history book, you know, and this guy who had dirt on every powerful person on Earth and was soon to go to trial died. Oh, maybe he had polio. Come on. We'll never know the answer for sure. In the meantime, I'm going to default with what seems like the more likely answer. John Wilkes Booth killed himself in prison. These things do happen. And we're not talking about John Wilkes Booth. We're talking about Epstein. No. I'm sorry. You guys can keep your conspiracy theories to yourselves. Yeah, died under incredibly suspicious circumstances. No. Honestly, the conspiracy theorists in my chat need to get out of here, okay? The he killed himself conspiracy theorists. Get out of here, okay? Go back to your 9/11 truther conspiracies, your moon landing denialism. I don't want to hear it. What happened on the first day of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial? Maxwell's accused of trafficking teenage girls to have sex with Jeffrey Epstein, her longtime partner. Not a girl boss moment. Her defense said on Monday she was being used as a scapegoat for him. Oh, people are saying John Wilkes Booth wasn't even killed. Didn't even kill himself. Ghislaine, it's Ghislaine Maxwell, not Ghislaine. Ghislaine, and I've been saying this for like 2 years on stream and none of you corrected me. Fine, Ghislaine Maxwell, sure. It's a little easier to say anyway. The sex trafficking trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's former romantic partner and employee, got underway in federal district court in Manhattan on Monday with opening statements and testimony from one of the pilots who flew Mr. Epstein's private planes. That's some scathing testimony. In the coming weeks, jurors are expected to hear testimony from 4 women who prosecutors said were abused as teenagers by Mr. Epstein. Ms. Maxwell, the daughter of a British media mogul, faces 6 counts stemming from what prosecutors say was her role in the sexual exploitation of the women. The charges include enticing a minor to travel to engage in criminal sexual activity and transporting a minor with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity. To me, this feels like the tip of the iceberg, right? You know? I mean, like, maybe they've got her on a few counts, but if she was working with Epstein for that long, there are probably hundreds of charges that could be brought against her if they had perfect information on everything she did. The jury will hear the story of Jane, who was 14 when she met Mr. Epstein. Phenomenal stuff there. Great. Fantastic. Defense strategy would shift blame to Mr. Epstein. Great. Phenomenal. Prosecution used one of Mr. Epstein's pilots to set the scene for jurors. We actually had some people implicated in the testimony of that former pilot, who would have ferried quite a few people to and from the island. He testified that Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and Prince Andrew all flew aboard Epstein's private plane. Now, this shouldn't be a huge surprise to us, considering the fact that these people were on the Black Book. But still, it's pretty interesting to have this logged in, you know, the court's records. Jeffrey Epstein's former pilot testified in Ghislaine Maxwell sex trafficking trial that a who's who of powerful men, including former presidents Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, flew aboard Epstein's private plane. Now, I want to make something clear, by the way, okay? The biggest obstacle that we have had historically, at least over the past couple of decades, and probably for quite a bit longer, to fighting against the predation of children is income inequality and conservatism. Conservatism, which mandates exploitation of women through subservience, lower levels of economic and political power, and a restriction of sex education, which prevents children from understanding what's happening to them, and income inequality by sheltering the ultra-wealthy from the consequences of their behavior by allowing them to maintain privileged social positions, which is a very, very, very mild definition of what Epstein had for himself as a ultra-wealthy private island vacationeur in contact with like all the wealthy people on Earth. So the issue here is the biggest organization that nominally cares about child sex trafficking in the United States is QAnon. But of course, you know, Laura Boebert, who one might say is QAnon friendly, tweeted this just 2 days ago, which I think is remarkably telling. Tomorrow, the Ghislaine Maxwell trial begins. Get ready for a higher than usual amount of leftist panic and misguided outrage. That's a weird thing to say. Higher than usual panic and misguided outrage about the partner to Jeffrey Epstein. What? That's a little bit weird, right? I mean, a smidgen, perhaps. If you know what I mean, like, it's a bit telling. And, you know, people in the comments are quick to point out that Boebert's husband was arrested for indecent exposure to a minor, you know, which seems a little funny given the context of this tweet. And then, you know, we have, of course, I don't want to scroll and see anything, you know, anything too spicy for stream, but you've got all these wonderful photos of Donald Trump with Jeffrey Epstein. And here's, this is my favorite Donald Trump quote. I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It's even said he likes beautiful women as much as I do. Many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it. Jeffrey enjoys his social life. Trump, 2002. You know, here's Trump with his kids next to Jeffrey Epstein. Classic stuff. Really. Let me see if I can't, where was that big image comp? You know? Lot of contact between those fine individuals. It seems to me that Boebert has a vested political interest in downplaying any testimony provided by people associated with the Ghislaine Maxwell trial because it would implicate Donald Trump, you know? And this is the reason why QAnon's efforts, or I guess perceived efforts to oppose child sex trafficking, have always been incredibly hollow, because they can't accept Trump as part of it. Trump is the most child rapingest person that has ever been in the US presidency, okay? Because to my knowledge, there's no other person who's bragged about his association with somebody like Jeffrey Epstein on the line of them being into younger girls, you know? Maybe not the most, he's up there, okay? If we had like a competition for child rapingest US presidents, Trump would easily be up there. He's absolutely a strong contender, you know? The Muhammad Ali of raping children, with all the sexual assault counts against him, some of which are incredibly substantiated and credible. The creepy shit he said about girls friends with Epstein. Classic behavior right there. Now, here's the critical thing, okay? Bill Clinton was also implicated in the pilot's testimony. But here's the difference between QAnon and the far right and the left. I don't give a fuck about Bill Clinton. I don't give a shit. If he's implicated in that trial, good. I'll laugh at him. Is he sent to... I don't care. Good. Dig up anything on him. Bring up anything. Fucking arrest him. I don't care. I'll laugh. I think it's funny. I don't give a shit. Prince Andrew, that's doubly funny. He's British. I don't care. The critical difference here is that, and I could be maybe being a bit charitable, I don't think liberals go to bat for Bill Clinton on this Epstein shit the way the right goes to bat for Trump. Not at all. Like, not even slightly. In fact, I don't think I have ever seen a liberal on social media downplay. I'm just talking liberals, not lefties. A liberal downplay Bill Clinton being in the black book or anything like that, you know? I genuinely don't think so. It's possible that if Bill Clinton was currently like the leader of the party in the way that Trump is for the right, that it might be a bit different. But on the right, you have this categorical unwillingness to acknowledge reality. On the left, maybe you have some milquetoast Kopi defense. At the most, maybe. And the QAnon people come up with insane conspiracies for it as well, you know? The QAnon people are like, have you seen them talk about his relationship with Epstein? They say that Donald Trump was friends with Epstein because he was operating as a secret undercover agent to uncover the crimes of the liberal elite. And that's why he was such good friends with Epstein for like his whole life. That really, that's like the narrative. Like, oh, well, why was Trump friends with the pedophile king? You know, the king of all pedophiles, sort of like a fairy prince. You know, he's like the existential deity of raping children when you're a billionaire. Oh, well, it must have been because he was trying to take him down from the inside for decades and never succeeded in doing so or showed any evidence of trying to take him down from the inside. It's like, okay. I just think it's really, really funny that this was what she tweeted preemptively. I mean, right off the bat. Leftist panic and misguided outrage. Jesus Christ. Well, anyway. He said he also remembered Prince Andrew, Maine Senator George Mitchell, Ohio Senator John Glenn, and actor Kevin Spacey on flights. He also said he'd fly Epstein to Columbus, Ohio, where Epstein also had property, to see billionaire businessman Les Wexner. Epstein referred to Wexner as his client, but Vysotsky said he believed them to be friends as well. None of the high-profile passengers mentioned in Vysotsky's testimony Tuesday are alleged to have committed any wrongdoing in relation to the ongoing trial. Clinton spokesman previously admitted to Clinton being on board Epstein's plane 4 times, but said the former president knew nothing of Epstein's, quote, terrible crimes. Of course, obviously. In 2002 and 2003, Clinton took a total of 4 trips on Epstein's airplane, 1 to Europe, 1 to Asia, 2 to Africa, which included stops in connection with the work of the Clinton Foundation. Vysotsky's testimony came on the second day of Maxwell's federal trial on charges of conspiracy and sex trafficking. The trial is likely to provide a glimpse into the enigmatic life of Epstein and illuminating some of his connections to high-profile figures like Clinton, Trump, Bill Gates, and Prince Andrew. Epstein was found dead in his prison cell shortly after his arrest on sex trafficking charges in 2019. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death to be suicide by hanging, as we all know. Maxwell, the British socialite and Epstein's close confidant, was arrested a year later and has pleaded not guilty to 6 charges: pyramid scheme of abuse, so on and so forth. Pilot testifies he never saw any sexual activity. That would probably implicate him as well. I feel like in all likelihood, any of the explicit sexual activity was probably kept pretty closely wrapped, because the more layers of defense they have, the more plausible deniability they can invoke, the less likely it is that anything gets out at an unwanted time or in a way they can't control. Minor victim 1, what a name, identified in court with the pseudonym Jane, testified after Vysotsky that she met Maxwell and Epstein as a 14-year-old and described in graphic detail incidents of sexual abuse by Epstein that Maxwell would at times join in on, both in Palm Beach, Florida, and Manhattan when she was 14, 15, and 16 years old. I think there's an article here on the... yes, here we go. This is one dedicated largely to the accusation from minor victim 1. One of the 4 women who said they were groomed for sex by Ghislaine Maxwell testified Wednesday that disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein took her to meet Donald Trump when she was just 14. Ooh. Testifying in Maxwell's trial in New York City, the woman who was being identified by the pseudonym Jane said on cross-examination that she met the future president in the 1990s at Mar-a-Lago, his resort in Palm Beach, Florida. Jane did not allege any improper behavior by Trump and did not go into further detail about why she was at the resort. Mr. Epstein introduced you to Donald Trump, correct? Yes, Jane replied. She took part in a Miss Teen USA beauty pageant associated with Trump. Trump's spokesman has not responded to say that he recalls whether or not he met Jane. Following Epstein's 2019 arrest, Trump told reporters he was, quote, not a fan of the financier. Wonderful stuff here. It's all over the place. We're going to see how this trial pans out, though I severely doubt we're going to get a lot of really clear information. I'll try to keep up with this stuff as it comes out because it's going to be pretty wild, I assume. The thing that's like really problematic about this, though, is that this is not an instance where you can rely on the justice system to come to good outcomes. This is the issue with income inequality, and to an extent, even democracy. Even the process of electing people puts people in positions above you, whether they're chosen or not. And the overwhelming power held by people whose interest it is to not have information come out will invariably tip the scales here. Like the courts have quite a bit of power. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the prosecution is going to throw the case or that they're being like blackmailed or like the chief prosecutor had their family held at gunpoint, anything crazy like that. But put more simply, I think it's really clear, and there's plenty of historical precedent for this, that the more powerful the people you're accusing are, the less likely it is that all this information comes out. We see this in like Me Too cases. Like Weinstein was crazy powerful, and he's like a drop in the bucket compared to the total power of the people who could be implicated by any full testimony with regards to Epstein. Like like Weinstein was huge, and he's like an ant compared to the combined interests of everyone involved here. Um, we can't trust the outcome of this trial, but we can make the conclusion that Maxwell is guilty. The issue with this, and unfortunately, what I need to do here, we need to talk about the limits of knowledge. Okay, imagine we live 500 years ago. Okay, there's no internet. There's barely a printing press. Would there have been a printing press? I don't even think there's a printing press back then. Whatever. There was there 500. 500? Okay, a printing press, fine. But there's no internet, you know. And what's more, information that circulates is not the most reliable. It takes a while to move from person to person, and a lot of it is controlled directly by the people in power. Now, in situations like this, the information that people had access to probably didn't paint a really clear picture on information that was inconvenient to the ruling class. You know, this has been a problem for historians for hundreds, thousands of years. It's that if you look far enough in the past, you get more and more unreliable information, especially when information pertains to stuff that might have been inconvenient for people who had control over the dissemination of that information at the time. Now, in retrospect, the historians have the benefit of comparing and contrasting the information left by everyone who ever wrote anything down, and they can piece things together and infer, but it's really difficult to know for sure. And there are lots of blank spaces in history that historians either use inference to kind of fill gaps in for, or they just say we don't know. And we'll never know, probably. Yeah, history is written by the victors is an inaccurate saying, but it does reflect a problem, you know? This was an issue, for example, with our perspective of the Scandinavians. When we think, you know, Scandinavians 1,000 years ago, we think Vikings. That was not the majority of Scandinavians back then. The issue is that the Scandinavians didn't write very much, and the Christians that they attacked did. So the Christians wrote records of the small portion of Scandinavians who were Vikings attacking down, across the rest of Europe. But the Scandinavians didn't write much on their, you know, rich domestic history, their mercantile, their trade, their culture. A lot of it was sort of pieced together from the perspectives of the victims of their attacks. Now, the reason I'm saying all of this, yeah, our understanding of the Wild West is also really inaccurate. The reason I'm saying all of this is because sometimes you have situations where it is impossible to know the outcome. One of them, for example, would be whether Epstein killed himself. We're never going to find out whether or not he did, you know? In truth, we're never really going to find out what happened in a lot of criminal cases, you know? There are plenty of criminal cases that we might be able to like read up on and are pretty much done deals, but do we know whether or not the coroner had a bias? Do we know whether or not there was some fuckery behind the scenes? Do we know whether or not this, that, or the other? Maybe people lied. Maybe people were bribed into silence or to action. We're never really going to know. But in most cases, I feel like we can reasonably infer that the information we have is accurate. With Epstein, I don't think that's the case because there is such a strong bias towards ambiguity in that outcome. There's so much potential power to lean on the scales to distort what the public becomes aware of. In my mind, there are two real possibilities here. Once Epstein was arrested and he was to go to trial, there are two realities here, okay? One of them is that the most powerful people in the world decided they didn't want to risk getting involved, and that a series of coincidental things, cameras, the guards, being taken off suicide watch, all of that happened in succession, and then he was able to kill himself. Or, as history, I think, suggests has happened many times, of the many, many powerful interests skewed in favor of his death, they did something to affect it. To me, I think that the ambiguity there is severe enough that it's okay taking the perspective that biases you against the people in power. Or to put it another way, the burden of proof was on them to keep Epstein alive. If they wanted us to trust their outcomes, Epstein should have been under very clear, close supervision 24 hours a day, and that their failure to adhere to that standard of credibility means there's no reason to trust any official narrative concerning that story. But we'll never find out. Now, after acknowledging that, we have the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. And to this, we will never know how much information is being kept quiet because of people operating behind the scenes. We will never know. We don't know how many people have been blackmailed. We don't know how many people have been bribed. We don't know how many people have been influenced behind the scenes. We know there's a tremendous incentive to do all of these things. And what's more, we know that every type of behavior I'm describing right now has been proven to have taken place in cases that have far less on the line. If you think these behaviors manifest in lower level cases but wouldn't in something like the implication of all the powerful people in the world, I think honestly that's really naive. It's a kind of deference to power, a kind of institutional trust that I don't sympathize with. Like the people who are incapable of believing that the feds could ever lie to you, or the government could have lied about the Iraq War. The idea that all the powerful people in the world are always trustworthy and never ever tip the scales in their favor when they feel it expedient. Sometimes we find out about it and sometimes we don't. Sometimes the CIA does something bad and we don't find out about it for 20 or 30 years. Sometimes conspiracy is later proven to be true after the fact, and thus the validity of conspiracy theories, in my mind, is determined by how many logical hoops you have to jump through. QAnon is moon logic, but the idea that, hey, maybe in a system where we know the wealthy are heavily privileged, where we know the wealthy have a tremendous amount of discretion when it comes to protecting themselves, where we know that hundreds of powerful people have a vested interest in protecting themselves against the possibility of a damning trial, maybe some fuckery is taking place behind the scenes. Can we ever know that for sure? Well, really depends on how likely anyone is to get caught. But I prefer to err on the side of caution and to assume that the most powerful people in the world don't have the same interest as me in incriminating themselves. Does that make sense? Does anyone disagree with that? Is it more likely Epstein was allowed to kill himself rather than outright murdered? There's no categorical difference as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, the tragedy here is that in line of never knowing, we can never really adjust our behavior to appropriately account for what we suspect might actually be the case. So all we can really do is sit and watch as, systems we have no control over play out, and I guess we'll see what happens. Yes, bye, YouTube. I'll put it another way. I know there are people watching right now who think that I'm off my loony end. Did we not go over what China has done with an understanding that the Chinese government is willing to lie to cover its ass, and therefore documents they produce with regards to their own internal behavior should be taken with great scrutiny, or if they even remotely contrast the political interests of the people in power, should be almost borderline disregarded. It's not about ignoring reality. It's about ignoring testimony from biased actors, and those are two very, very different things. Um, I unironically can't imagine that Epstein killed himself, or that nobody else had any hand in it. Just to me, the idea that all the powerful people in the world would just hope that Epstein didn't implicate them in the trial to lower his sentence is like wild to me. You know what I mean? Like that to me is like, yes, all of these incredibly enormously powerful people were just willing to just sit there watching the TV, crossing their fingers, hoping Epstein wouldn't implicate them. Like, why would, why would I, why wouldn't Maxwell do the same though? Well, we don't know. We don't know what level of information she had access to, what deals, promises she's made. She was loose for a year after everything with Epstein took place. You don't think she was meeting with contacts, sweetening deals, making promises? That's been her entire thing. Maxwell's entire career has been about roping as many people as possible into her circle of distrust, so that they all go down with the same ship. Why do you think she takes pictures with so many people? I don't think she's like, not every person photographed with Maxwell has been like gone to the island or anything. She would deliberately seek powerful people to be implicated with, so that everyone has a vested interest in making sure that she isn't caught or treated poorly. Yeah, Trump did that too. This is like well known. Guys, like the logic behind this is incredibly sound if you're a monstrous piece of shit, super wealthy, pedophile, whatever. Can you imagine how easy it would be to keep people like wrapped around your little finger? Imagine you're Jeffrey Epstein and you know everyone, okay? Everybody has heard rumors about you, but people don't talk about it openly because if you're found out to be talking about it openly, you lose the favor of Epstein and thus connections he's associated with. You're an up and coming entrepreneur, politician, whatever, and you get an invite to party with them, and you've heard the rumors, but you also know there are enormous social opportunities there. There are enormous, incredibly powerful people. It could be the beginning of your career. It is the end group. And even if it's gate kept behind association with a creepy dude like Epstein, that might be worth it for you. There might be more social value to going over to the island than there would be in ignoring it and performatively distancing yourself. You don't know. If you don't accept the invitation, are you going to be blacklisted to future events? Are you going to be ignored or passed over for promotions? Are you going to lose out on opportunities for business dealings? Are there connections you might have otherwise had that will ignore you because they feel like you're snubbing them by not going to the group? You feel like you have to go. So you go to Epstein's Island. There are drugs, of course. There's alcohol, of course. There are plenty of above age people that you see all over the island. Nothing looks as bad as you've heard. And you get drunk as hell. And of course, there are sex workers, and you have a good time. And when you wake up the next morning, there's somebody there, a man in a suit with shades, waiting for you. And they say, hey, that person you slept with last night, here's her ID. And she was 14 years old. And now they have you. It doesn't matter if they're blackmailing you. It doesn't matter if what they're doing is illegal. Even the whisper that what you did is going to be sufficient to ruin you and put you away for, you're done. You're forever done. And I imagine, and I'm just guessing, that that's the method by which Epstein and Maxwell were able to do what they did for so fucking long. Because they didn't just offer themselves as some vacation resort for hyper-powerful people. They roped people in and shared in their downfall. If I go down, all of you go down, so fucking protect me, or else you're coming in next. That's my guess. Because that seems to me like the rational thing for an utterly immoral piece of shit to do if they had the resources to do it. That seems to me to fit in line with all the information we know about Epstein. And that makes a lot more sense, I think, than the QAnon-aligned variant of this argument, which is that every billionaire independently sought him out because they're pedophiles. I think it's far more likely that it was a mix of people who predatorily sought out Epstein and people who were looking for clout and got roped into it and are now implicated into defending Epstein or ignoring him or not ratting out on him. And thus the circle expands. And if you have hundreds or thousands of people like this who can't say a fucking word because if they do, you're going to whisper information about their indiscretions. We need evidence to prove that. It's super hard to do. That's the thing. We'll never prove it. That's the point of conspiracies. The whole point of this operation was to keep this information from being made public. We'll never know. I could be completely wrong. I think this is a likely explanation for the pieces of information that we have. Um, the idea that stuff like this hasn't happened at all in history is ahistorical. The idea that it can't happen is naive. It just, that to me seems like a fairly likely explanation for everything that we've seen. So I'm sure some of the billionaires were just like, oh my God, Epstein's a pedo. Then I am a billionaire, thus I'm all for it, you know? Um, but um, but I think there's a very broad. The only problem about what you're saying is that there should have been a leak once he suicided himself. Why? So the next people come for you? I think it's possible to create these networks as long as you're doing them with the right people. You know, oftentimes the reason criminal conspiracies fail is because one person gets picked up and everyone else doesn't really have the money to protect themselves from any legal problems. If a person in a criminal conspiracy gets picked up, that's it for the conspiracy if they have info, unless they're very loyal. But if everyone involved in this has blackmail on them, family members whose addresses are known, 100 other people they know who could easily have them killed while they're in prison, almost anyone roped into this would easily have the ability to put hits out on people who were implicated and in prison. So it seems like the kind of net where you're not relying on one enforcer, everyone's enforcing the net. Does that make sense? The goal of that net would be that everyone has to protect it, because if anyone doesn't, or if anyone gets implicated. And what if they start targeting your family? You know, what if it's like, oh, well, if we think a leak has come from you and we absolutely have ways of checking in on it, then we know where your daughter, your son, your granddaughter, your other granddaughter, your third granddaughter, your mother, your, you know, like is what I'm talking about like TV show plotline stuff? Yes. But we're also talking about the largest sex trafficking billionaire network, as to my knowledge, ever broken open. We're not talking about some average case. We're talking about the exceptional case here. Epstein's Island wasn't like, oh, you know, some New York detective is like, we get this every Tuesday. No, this is the thing. This is like a you know, a centurion event, the ultimate in cracking open a sex trafficking case. So if circumstantial, you know, events are a little extraordinary, I think that's acceptable in terms of like inferring possible behavior or decisions. Oh, by the way, if you want a solution to any of this stuff, like literally anything, okay, addressing income inequality is the way to do it. Close tax loopholes, get rid of, deal with the trillions of dollars that are held offshore, keep control of the money within your economy, make sure nobody has the economic power to buy their way out of legal culpability. The solution here is always systemic, not we have bad billionaires. QAnon does that too. They don't care about billionaires. They want the good billionaires. No, the problem here is in the power differential, not in the people who occupy either side of it. You could replace them all with a new set of billionaires and we'd have same fundamental issues.